Greetings, dear friends. I present to your attention the most common malfunctions and breakdowns that occur on the Ford Explorer. Often a potential buyer of the 5th generation Ford Explorer is scared off by the engine line, but it's not the frequency and high cost of breakdowns that scares off, but rather the lack of alternative units. 3.5-liter units of the Cyclone series produce 249 and 294 HP each. Assembled on the same blocks of cylinders, the EcoBoost turbo cannon generates from 340 to 360 forces. You understand, tax, expense and all that. There are no other motors. And here the question naturally arises. Why are people ready to feed the Highlander and not less respectable American? The Toad strangling? Moreover, just the same Explorer turned out to be one of the most economical large crossovers in terms of fuel appetites, an average of 13 to 14 liters per 100 kilometers. What other alternative is needed? It's just a fairy tale. What is more important, the Ford Explorer will not offend with the resource of the engine. To drive 400,000 kilometers is not a problem for it, but the reality itself. As Toyota drivers say, after 100,000 kilometers, the run-in is past. It's a pity, not everything is so simple. To extend the resource, you will not only have to change consumables in time and abandon intentional violence with the gas pedal, but something must be done and done in advance, before it explodes somewhere. For example, remove to hell with catalysts, catalytic converters. There are two of them. Not all of them live up to 150 TKM. Someone was lucky enough to encounter shedding of honeycombs and up to the first 100 on the odometer. The worst thing can happen if you wait until errors appear due to a drop in catalyst efficiency. After destruction, crumbs can get into the combustion chamber and lift up the cylinders. Capital, in this case, is provided. We delete. For those who are concerned about nature, there is a solution to install metal catalysts. They are expensive. The pump was known as the second weak point of the engine. It also rarely reaches 150,000. It flows and leaves a puddle under the bottom. In this case, it is better to load the car on a tow truck, and for repairs, since there is a risk of catching a wedge of the pump, and it, after all, rotates from the timing chain. They did not obey. Bam bam and sticking pistons with valves. By the way, the chain itself holds up to 200 to 250 TKM with dignity. In many ways, the reliability of the Ford Explorer 5 engines will depend on the fuel used. Although it is written that it is possible to fill the 92nd, however, in practice, direct injection and catalysts like a good 95th without unnecessary impurities. If under the hood there is an inflated EcoBoost 360 HP, then the fuel recommendation should be multiplied by 2. A little about EcoBoost. As we said, technically this is the same 3.5 Cyclone with only 2 turbines, thanks to which the Explorer turns from the retirement closer to a flying monster. The monster loves to eat and loves to be looked after. You can also safely cut the oil change period in half if you will not go wrong. Sooner or later, more precisely about 200,000 kilometers, the Garrett snails will require replacement, shaking out of their pockets 100,000 rubles each. Somewhere to the first 100 in the oily pipes, it becomes clear that the turbines begin to increase the amount of oil passed through the seals. All other problems and childhood sorrows of the motor are similar to the atmospheric counterpart. The 6-speed automatic for the 5th generation Explorer was developed in collaboration with General Motors. For Ford, this is not a compliment, given the disastrous, in my opinion, a series of jam transmissions 6T. However, the automatic transmission 6F55 of our hero, although it is similar to the 6T70, but the owners and servicemen have only positive feedback on it. The safety margin is sufficient in order not to worry about the box for at least 300 TKM, provided that the lubricant is periodically changed. The main problem of the Ford Explorer and the headache of its owners lies further in the angular gearbox, called the transfer case, or even more simply, the transfer case. Not so long ago, they scolded the same note of the third generation Hyundai Santa Fe crossover, and now the mothers again, but already an American. Explorer's handout is located poorly, near the catalysts. Also, due to its compactness, the unit undergoes considerable loads and, in addition to everything, heats itself up. All this has led to the fact that oil, really not designed for such thermal conditions, degrades after 25 to 30,000 kilometers, turns into something similar to solid oil. If the lubricant is not changed at this moment, then a complete Achtung follows, accelerated destruction of bearings and gears to 80,000 kilometers, some of whom have had a characteristic hum with vibration. This means everything. We have arrived. Everything is at risk. Cars of the urban cycle are in particular danger, since there is the least amount of free cooling in this mode. For the buyer of a used car, it is always a pick and a poke. On the lift, there is not diagnosed. For a full check, the car will have to accelerate along the highway up to 120 km per hour and listen to possible howls. If the check showed that everything is fine, then it is still better to change the oil immediately, even if the car is still completely new. We add a chronic leak of oils seals to this cauldron of constructive miscalculations, and we come to the conclusion that the Razdatka is rightfully considered the most dangerous place in the Explorer. The cost of replacing a complete assembly costs about 100,000 rubles. Weak CV joints answers after this seem like a mere trifle, but you should not neglect their periodic check. Better to replace the rubber band on time than to buy the whole hinge later. I can't help but give credit to the all-wheel drive system. The rear axle is connected here with a Dana electromagnetic clutch, as well as the terrain management system for off-road capabilities. It works harmoniously and frugally in relation to the car. Problems with these boons almost never arise. And yet, it is worth remembering that the Thief Explorer is not intended for off-road drives. The suspension also hints at insolvency on the off-road. Cast front levers at first may give a false idea of the power of the chassis, but this is McPherson. It makes no sense to wait for the reliability of the 200th cruiser from him. At the same time, the chassis is not particularly active. The first costs are usually required of a mileage of about 100,000 kilometers. About how long bushings and stabilizer struts, as well as front wheel bearings, live. Silent blocks of the front levers rarely pass 150,000. Shock absorbers are much more tenacious. Rear suspension with a surprise. Brake-up levers here fell under a revocable campaign due to their tendency to split into pieces. The most annoying thing is that some were lucky enough to find out what it is, when on the highway at a speed of 130 km per hour. The rear wheel simply falls on its side. When buying a car, check with the dealer whether the work has been carried out or immediately sign up for a visit. At the same time, check the condition of the rear silent blocks, because they did not differ in endurance. 200,000 km is the resource limit. And what is Ford without real problems at low mileage? The owners are aware of the saw, so they drive and wait. They are waiting for the first knocks to appear or begin to bite the steering wheel in extreme positions, and the EUR will simply refuse. It will not be boring. The reason is again in the design. Through the enters of the steering rods, water seeps into the rack, and the grease, on the contrary, comes out, which is why the insides are actively corroding. The EUR sometimes destroys the unscrewed bolt of the steering shaft pulley. This is really fun. Owners of the Ford Explorer 5 have to deal with preventive maintenance here too. The most harmless thing is just knocking on irregularities. They arise as usual due to worn-out rail guide bushings. Everything is the same as with the third focus. After 30 to 40 dkm, the first sounds can already be expected. The rail is maintainable. Specialized services for its bulkhead ask for about 20,000 rubles. On this, information about the problems of Ford Explorer is exhausted. If you know more or do not agree with what you heard, I'm waiting for you in the comments.